The Young and the Restless spoilers preview. Week of March, 16 to 202-026. The air in the Newman Tack House felt suffocatingly thin, thick with an unspoken dread that clung to the walls like damp velvet. Nick Newman sat on the edge of his unmade bed, the harsh, unnatural glow of his smartphone casting deep, hollow shadows across his face. His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling violently. It wasn't just the phantom chill of the Genoa City night creeping through the window panes that made him shake. It was the ferocious, gnawing hunger deep within his marrow. Fentanyl. The word itself tasted like ash in his mouth. What had begun as a desperate, misguided attempt to numb the overwhelming chaos of his life had rapidly mutated into a monstrous parasite dictating his every waking thought and hijacking his nervous system. He squeezed his eyes shut, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, but the image on the screen was already burned into his retinas. It was a text message sent from an untraceable burner number, accompanied by a candid, grainy photograph of his son Noah walking out of crimson lights. The text beneath it was a masterclass in psychological torture times. Noah's looking over his shoulder, Nick. But he's looking the wrong way. Accidents happen so easily to the people you love. TikTok, asterisks, Matt Clark. The name echoed in Nick's mind like a death knell. Matt was a ghost from a past. Nick had desperately tried to bury a relentless sociopath whose vendetta against the Newman family knew no bounds. And now, Matt had set his sights on Noah. Nick's chest heaved as a primal protective rage temporarily sliced through the foggy haze of his addiction. He couldn't let Matt touch his son. He couldn't rely on the Genoa City Police Department, and he certainly couldn't rely on his father Victor, whose heavy-handed tactics often caused more collateral damage than they prevented. No, this was his burden, his sin to wash away. Nick convinced himself that he was the only one who could end this nightmare. He had to go to Las Vegas, where Sienna's digging had pinpointed Matt's latest base of operations. He had to sever the head of the snake. But as Nick stood up, the room tilted violently. His knees buckled, and he had to grip the edge of the mahogany dresser to keep from collapsing. The physical toll of the drug was undeniable. His muscles ached with a deep, throbbing intensity, and his skin crawled with invisible insects. He reached into the top drawer, his fingers brushing against the small hidden plastic bag. Just one to take the edge off. Just one to steady his hand so he could kill Matt Clark. Nick swallowed the pill dry, hating himself, hating Matt, and letting the dark, artificial warmth wash over his battered psyche. He grabbed his duffel bag. It was time. You are not walking out that door, Nicholas. Sharon Rosales stood firmly in the entryway of the Tack House, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Her eyes, usually so warm and empathetic, were wide with a frantic, desperate terror. Beside her stood Noah, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked as though his teeth might shatter. The air crackled with the kind of high-stakes emotional electricity that only a family pushed to the absolute brink could generate. "Move out of my way, Sharon," Nick growled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely sounded like his own. He slung the heavy leather duffel bag over his shoulder, the artificial confidence from the fentanyl coursing through his veins, making him feel 10 feet tall and utterly invincible. "Dad, listen to her," Noah pleaded, stepping forward to block his father's path. "You're not thinking straight. You're erratic. Sienna already told us that Matt's operation in Vegas is massive. He's working with Reza, a woman who used to run high-stakes underground games for Adam. These aren't just street thugs, they're an organized syndicate. You go out there alone, you're walking into a slaughterhouse." "I am protecting you," Nick roared, the sudden volume of his voice making both Sharon and Noah flinch. He dropped the bag, stepping into Noah's personal space, his eyes wild and dilated. "Do you understand that Matt sent me pictures of you, Noah? He knows your routines. He knows where you sleep. I am not going to sit around in Genoa City and wait for him to make his move. I am going to Vegas, and I am going to end him." Sharon reached out, her fingers gently grazing Nick's arm. "Nick, please. Look at yourself. You're sweating. You're shaking. Adam offered to help us. He knows Reza. He knows how she operates. Let him go with you, or better yet, let the authorities handle this. You are in no condition to face Matt Clark." The mention of his condition made a flash of defensive paranoia ignite behind Nick's eyes. "My condition is fine," he spat, pulling his arm away from Sharon as if her touch burned him. "I don't need Adam's help. I don't need anyone's help. Every time we involve the police, Matt slips through the cracks. Every time we wait, someone gets hurt. I'm doing this my way." "You're acting like Victor Noah," yelled the accusation, hanging heavily in the tense air. "You're pushing everyone away and trying to play God. But you're not Grandpa Dad. You're sick. We know about the pills. We know what's happening to you." Nick froze the words, hitting him like a physical blow to the sternum. For a fraction of a second, the invincible facade cracked, revealing the terrified, broken man beneath. But the fentanyl was a jealous master, and it quickly rebuilt the walls of his denial. "You don't know anything," Nick whispered, his tone suddenly chillingly flat. He picked up his bag, shouldering past his son and the mother of his children. "Lock the doors. Don't trust anyone. I'll call you when Matt is no longer a problem." Sharon sobbed, reaching for him one last time, but Nick was already out the door, disappearing into the dark, unforgiving night. He left behind a fractured family, entirely unaware that he was playing right into his enemy's hands. The dry, blistering heat of the Nevada desert hit Nick like an open oven door the moment he stepped out of the sliding glass doors of McCarran International Airport. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the damp chill of Wisconsin. Las Vegas was a city of sensory overload, a sprawling monument to vice, excess, and desperation. The neon lights of the Strip bled into the night sky, a kaleidoscope of aggressive, pulsating colors that made Nick's drug-addled brain throb in time with his heartbeat. He moved through the crowded sidewalks with a singular tunnel vision focus. Tourists bumped into him, spilling cheap margaritas and laughing loudly, completely oblivious to the lethal mission playing out in their midst. Nick barely registered them. His mind was a chaotic loop of strategic planning and chemical craving. He needed to find Reza, the linchpin in Matt's desert operation. Nick believed he was moving like a phantom, a stealthy predator stalking his prey. He checked into a seedy off-strip motel under an assumed name, paying in cash. He meticulously cleaned his unregistered firearm, his movements precise and practiced, though his hands still carried a faint, persistent tremor. He was Nicholas Newman, a man who had survived plane crashes, corporate wars, and the loss of his own children. He convinced himself that Matt Clark was just another obstacle to be crushed beneath his heel. But the reality was far more tragic. Nick wasn't a predator. He was a wounded animal, bleeding out in the sand, leaving a bright red trail for the hunters to follow. His perception of control was nothing more than a dangerous illusion, a chemical lie whispered to him by the fentanyl coursing through his bloodstream. Every move he made, from the ATM withdrawal in Genoa City to the burner phone he purchased at a Vegas convenience store, had been anticipated, tracked, and monitored. High above the chaotic, glittering expanse of the Las Vegas Strip, in an opulent, soundproof penthouse suite overlooking the Bellagio fountains, Matt Clark sat comfortably in a plush leather armchair. He swirled a measure of expensive amber bourbon in a crystal glass, the ice clinking softly in the quiet room. A cruel, self-satisfied smile played across his lips as he stared at a bank of high-definition security monitors mounted on the wall. On the center screen, a grainy black-and-white feed showed Nick Newman pacing aggressively in a dingy alleyway behind a prominent casino, right where Matt had planted the breadcrumbs for him to find. "He really is incredibly predictable, isn't he?" Matt mused, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. All that Newman arrogance completely blinding him to the reality of his situation. Reza Thompson stepped out of the shadows, her presence as silent and deadly as a drawn blade. She was a striking woman, radiating a cold, calculating intelligence. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot, and her tailored suit concealed the lethal weapons she carried with ease. She had once managed the chaotic, high-stakes world of Adam Newman's alter ego Spider, but she had since graduated to far more lucrative and far more dangerous enterprises. "He's running on fumes," Matt Reza noted, her eyes narrowing as she watched Nick on the monitor. "Look at his posture, the slight drag in his left leg, the way he keeps wiping his face. He's deep in withdrawal. The fentanyl has its hooks in him deep." Matt chuckled, a dark, hollow sound that held no warmth. "That's the beauty of it, Reza. I didn't even have to break him. He broke himself. I just applied a little pressure to his precious son, and Nick came running straight into the web. He thinks he's the hero of this story, charging in on his white horse to slay the dragon." "And what happens when the hero realizes the dragon has already won?" Reza asked, a predatory smirk touching her lips. "We give him exactly what he wants," Matt said, standing up and smoothing the lapels of his suit. "We give him a confrontation, but we dictate the terms. He's looking for a fight, but his body is screaming for a fix. We use that. We strip away his dignity, his strength, and his mind. By the time we're done with Nicholas Newman, Victor won't even recognize the pieces we send back to Genoa City." Matt had orchestrated the trap with meticulous, sadistic precision. He had intentionally leaked the location of a supposed drug exchange to one of his contacts, knowing the information would make its way to Nick. He had cleared out the warehouse, leaving only a carefully constructed stage for Nick's final act. And most insidiously, Matt had prepared a specialized dose of the very narcotic Nick was hopelessly addicted to, ready to use it not as a recreational escape, but as a weapon of absolute subjugation. The warehouse was located on the desolate outskirts of the city, a cavernous abandoned structure that smelled of rust, dust, and decay. The only illumination came from a single high-wattage bulb dangling from the ceiling, casting a harsh, unforgiving spotlight in the center of the concrete floor. Nick kicked the heavy metal door open his gun, raised his heart, hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline surged through him momentarily, masking the agonizing ache in his muscles. He stepped into the light, his eyes darting frantically across the shadows. Matt Nick roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated iron walls. "I'm here. Show yourself, you coward." Slowly, the sound of rhythmic clapping emerged from the darkness. Matt Clark stepped into the perimeter of the light, completely unarmed, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tailored trousers. He looked infuriatingly calm, a stark contrast to Nick's wild, disheveled appearance. Nicholas Matt greeted him, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. "I must say I'm flattered. You flew all this way just for me, though I have to admit you look terrible. The desert air isn't doing your complexion any favors." "Shut up," Nick snarled, closing the distance between them, the barrel of his gun aimed squarely at Matt's chest. "It ends tonight, Matt. You are never going near Noah again. You are never going near my family." Matt didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "Your family, oh Nick, you've already lost them. You just don't realize it yet. You think you're here to protect them, but the truth is you're here because you couldn't stand the silence in your own head. You're a junkie, Nick. A pathetic, shaking junkie." "I said shut up," Nick yelled, stepping closer, ready to strike. But as Nick lunged forward, the trap snapped shut. Reza materialized from the darkness behind him with terrifying speed. She didn't use a gun. She used a heavy, lead-filled sap, bringing it down with brutal, calculated force against the back of Nick's knee, the exact leg that had been previously injured. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded up Nick's spine. His leg gave out instantly, and he crashed to the concrete floor, the gun clattering out of his reach. He gasped, trying to push himself up, but his body, already ravaged by the fentanyl addiction and the onset of withdrawal, completely betrayed him. His muscles locked up, shivering uncontrollably. Matt walked over, casually kicking Nick's gun into the shadows. He crouched down, forcing Nick to look into his cold, dead eyes. "You thought you had the upper hand," Matt whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "You thought you could outsmart me, but you walked right into your own grave." Reza stepped into Nick's line of sight, her face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. In her gloved hand, she held a small glass vial filled with a clear liquid and a sterilized syringe. Nick's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. The sight of the drug triggered a violent, contradictory reaction within him, a profound existential dread mixed with a sickening, uncontrollable craving. He tried to thrash away to fight back, but Reza's boot came down hard on his shoulder, pinning him to the ground with bone-crushing force. "You see," Nick Matt continued, gently tracing the line of Nick's jaw with a mocking finger, "I could just put a bullet in your head. But that's too quick, too easy. I want Victor to know that his golden boy died a weak, pathetic addict in a gutter. I want Sharon to weep knowing she couldn't save you. We are going to pump you so full of this poison that your heart won't know whether to beat or burst. No, please." Nick choked out his pride, entirely shattered, reduced to a primal, desperate plea for survival. He fought against Reza's hold, but his strength was completely gone. The room began to spin, the edges of his vision darkening. "Hold him still," Matt ordered softly. Reza grabbed Nick's arm, expertly finding the vein. Nick screamed, a raw, ragged sound of absolute defeat as the needle pierced his skin. The plunger was pushed down. Instantly, a heavy, suffocating darkness rushed into Nick's brain, dragging him down into a terrifying, bottomless abyss. The last thing he heard before the world went completely black was the sound of Matt Clark laughing. More than 1,000 miles away, the sky over Genoa City had broken open, unleashing a torrential, freezing downpour that battered the windows of crimson lights. The coffee house was closed to the public, the chairs stacked on the tables, the espresso machines eerily silent. Sharon paced the length of the counter, her arms wrapped tightly around her own waist, as if trying to hold herself together. Her phone was pressed to her ear, the dial tone ringing, endlessly mocking her with its rhythmic monotony. Anything Noah asked, his voice tight with suppressed panic. He was sitting at a corner booth, a cup of untouched cold coffee in front of him. Sienna sat beside him, her hand resting over his, her face pale with worry. Sharon slowly lowered the phone, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and tracking down her cheeks. Straight to voicemail. Again. "It's been 12 hours. Noah?" He promised he would call the moment he landed. He promised. "I shouldn't have let him go," Noah whispered, burying his face in his hands. "I should have physically stopped him. I should have called Grandpa. I should have done something." "Don't do that," Noah Sienna said softly, though her own voice trembled. Nick made his own choices. The addiction. It took the wheel. You couldn't have stopped him. But the words offered no comfort. The silence in the coffeehouse grew heavier, pressing down on them with the crushing weight of impending tragedy. The man they loved, the protective father, the resilient Newman heir, had vanished into the neon-lit maw of Las Vegas without a single trace. At the Newman Ranch, Victor Newman stood by his massive office window watching the rain lash against the glass, an unsettling, unexplainable chill settling deep in his bones. He didn't know the details yet, but the patriarch's instincts were rarely wrong. A storm was coming, one that threatened to tear his family apart. Nicholas Newman was gone, swallowed whole by a trap of his own making, his fate hanging precariously by a thread in the hands of a madman. And as the night dragged on, the terrifying reality settled over Genoa City like a shroud. Nick might never come home. The rhythmic, relentless rocking of the yacht was the first thing to register in Jack Abbott's consciousness long before he could pry his heavy eyelids open. It was a sickening sway, a pendulum motion that sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing through his gut. He groaned, the sound tearing from a throat that felt like it had been scoured with sand. The air in the cabin was stifling, thick with the scent of expensive mahogany stale scotch, and a cloying floral perfume that made his stomach pitch violently. Jack tried to lift his hand to his face, but his arm felt as though it were encased in wet cement. The simple act of moving his fingers required a Herculean effort. When he finally managed to drag his hand across the Egyptian cotton sheets, the tactile sensation was wrong. These were not the familiar crisp linens of the Abbott mansion. This was not his bed, and the terrifying hollow void in his mind told him he had absolutely no idea how he had gotten here. He forced his eyes open. Blinding sunlight knifed through the porthole, stabbing at his retinas. He squeezed his eyes shut, gasping as a spike of pain drove itself directly through his temples. Asterisk, where am I times? The thought was sluggish, struggling to form in a brain that felt submerged in molasses. He tried to piece together the previous evening. He remembered Genoa City. He remembered the tension, the endless battles with Victor, the comforting thought of returning home to Diane. But after that, nothing. Just a terrifying, abyssal blankness. He opened his eyes again, slower, this time letting his pupils adjust to the glare. The cabin was opulent, undeniably so, but it felt like a gilded cage. He was lying in a king-size bed, his dress shirt unbuttoned, his tie gone. The realization sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic straight to his heart. He tried to sit up, but the room immediately began to spin in dizzying, violent circles. He collapsed back against the pillows, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He was completely disoriented, his equilibrium shattered, his mind a fragmented puzzle, missing all the crucial pieces. Then, the soft click of the cabin door opening cut through the silence. Jack turned his head, the motion agonizingly slow. The silhouette in the doorway was backlit by the hallway lights, a feminine figure holding a silver tray. For a fleeting, desperate second, his drug-addled brain conjured the image of his wife. Asterisk, Diane, times, he thought a wave of relief, threatening to wash over him. Asterisk, thank God, Diane found me. Asterisk. But as the figure stepped into the light of the cabin, the relief evaporated, replaced by a chilling, paralyzing horror. It wasn't Diane. It was Patty Williams. She looked eerily calm, her expression arranged into a serene, almost domestic smile that did not reach the manic gleam in her eyes. She was dressed softly, looking every bit the devoted caretaker, carrying a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a glass of ice water. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Patty murmured, her voice, a sickeningly sweet melody that grated against Jack's frayed nerves. She moved with a practiced, terrifying grace, setting the tray down on the bedside table before turning her full, unsettling attention to him. "Patty," Jack croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. What are you doing here? Where are we?" Patty's smile widened, a soft, indulgent expression, as if she were speaking to a confused child. She sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning softly under her weight. Jack instinctively tried to recoil, to pull his body away from her proximity, but his limbs refused to obey the frantic commands of his brain. He was a prisoner in his own flesh. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be, Jack," she whispered, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from his sweat-dampened forehead. Her touch made his skin crawl, a visceral reaction of revulsion that he was too weak to act upon. "We're together. Finally. Just the two of us, far away from all the noise. Far away from times her asterisk." What did you do to me?" Jack managed to ask, his tongue feeling thick and clumsy. I was looking for... Shh. Patty cooed, her fingers trailing down his cheek. "You don't need to worry about anything anymore. You were so exhausted last night, my poor darling. The scotch I gave you. It just helped you relax. You needed to relax, Jack. You were so wound up, so unhappy." Asterisk, the scotch. Asterisk, a fragmented image flashed in Jack's mind. A crystal tumbler, amber liquid. Patty's smiling face handing it to him. He had tasted it. He had felt the sudden, terrifying weakness washing over him, the room tilting on its axis. She had drugged him. "You drugged me," he accused, his voice gaining a fraction of its normal strength, fueled by rising anger. "You poisoned me, Patty. I need to get out of here. I need to call Diane." At the mention of Diane's name, Patty's serene mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the dark, obsessive hatred simmering just beneath the surface. But she recovered instantly, her smile returning, though it was now laced with a chilling, triumphant pity. "Oh, Jack," Patty sighed, shaking her head slowly. She leaned in closer, the scent of her perfume suffocating him. "You're still so confused. The lingering effects of the alcohol, I suppose. But you don't need to pretend with me. Not anymore. We crossed that bridge last night." Jack's heart began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. "What are you talking about? What bridge?" Patty let out a soft, breathy laugh, her eyes dropping to his unbuttoned shirt. "You really don't remember, or are you just feeling guilty now in the light of day? It's okay, Jack. I understand. Old habits die hard. You've been playing the role of the dutiful husband for so long, you've forgotten how to be honest about your own desires."